Hey, Scott, welcome to the Z Learning Podcast. Thank you so much for stopping by today.
It's my pleasure, and thank you, Zeb, for having me.
My pleasure. So, for those who don't know who you are, let's open with just a little background. You're in PR. Tell us a little bit about your career, how you got into it, and what you're up to now.
Sure. So I'll do it in reverse chronological order. At the moment, I am the president and founder of Level PR, a boutique PR agency that works with tech startups, usually on the B2B side, sometimes B2C, but often between the stages of seed round and Series B funding. Work with a variety of different startups. Fintech is one of my specialties. E-commerce, retail tech, supply chain, and a whole bunch of other different industries. The business has been around for a little over 6 years, but I've been doing PR and specifically tech PR for about 23 years. And how I got started was kind of an accident. When I was at the Newhouse School at Syracuse, I knew people who were PR majors. Did I know what it was or have any interest in it? No, I was a writing for television, radio, and film major. So when I got out of college, I came to the city, and that was what I was trying to accomplish. I was trying to get a job in that sector or TV production or something. And then when that didn't work out, a number of months later, a headhunter I was working with suggested to me, "Hey, Scott, I know you're a writer, right? You're a good writer." I'm like, "Yeah, I think so. I like to think so." So she's like, "That's great. I have a job position that could work, where writing's a big part of it. How do you feel about public relations?" And once again, it was just like the few people I knew who were PR majors at school. I was like, "Okay, open to it. I don't know anything about it, so sure, you could submit me for the position. And in the meantime, I'll just do some digging and do some research." And then she started submitting me for positions, and then I was coming in from interviews because at the time I was living in South Jersey and commuting in and booking all like three interviews in one day. And also at the time, the internet was still in its infancy.
What
And
time of period is this
oh,
approximately?
sure, that's we're talking like, oh geez, like 19 late 98, 1999. So the internet existed.
Really? I thought you look a lot younger. I thought like you're talking like, 2003 or something. Wow, okay.
Not no, well, thank you for the compliment. But yeah, no, and I know you remember the internet back in those days. It was there, but it
You've
wasn't
got mail, of course.
yeah, it wasn't the resource of what it is now. And so I actually had to do research on not just the industry, but who the firms were, and to familiarize myself with the types of PR firms out there and which one might be a fit. And I had to do that by the old-fashioned way. I went to the Science and Technology Library quite often over on Fifth Avenue, right near the Empire State Building, because they had all these books. It might have been O'Dwyer's PR or one of the industry standards that produced these books that had all these stats and information, because not all these firms even had a website yet. So I did my research there. So when the headhunter was coming up with these opportunities, I could understand and make a formed decision on which ones I'd like to pursue. And then ultimately, I got my first PR job at a trade association for the shopping center industry. After a year or so there, I realized it wasn't for me. So I took the plunge and ended up in Silicon Valley in 2000 at the end of the first .com at boom, and had my first real experience doing agency side tech public relations. And here I am today.
Wow, okay. So a couple things before we go back to your career. Do you regret not buying any domains of these companies back when you were in the library?
Oh, the career I could have had of being a domain squatter and selling itself to the highest bidder, if you will. Or I guess the other way to you could version that is what, website arbitrage.
Right.
No, I don't. Even though I could have probably made a quick buck, I don't know if I would have been able to live myself. This is not my
Not
style.
your style. Yeah, yeah. Funny, when I was in fifth grade, I was like on AOL and I was like into Harry Potter and I like put in harrypotter.com and it didn't exist. I mean, I don't know. Somebody could have owned the name then. I wouldn't have known, but if they hadn't and I had known about these things, I probably should have like told my parents to buy it or something for like $10. It probably would have been like or less. It was probably, I don't know what a domain cost then for that, probably not almost nothing. Um
Mm.
so yeah, anyway, and then you went into the PR world, right? And
Mhm.
It sounds like from the very beginning you were really in the tech scene. You weren't, because I think when people think of public relations, you can talk about all kinds of things. Like my uncle, same time period for many years, was working at a huge PR firm, Burst and Marsteller,
Oh,
in
sure.
this, yeah, in the city, and they were doing like McDonald's and
Mm.
Pepsi, and but you were always in tech. What uh inspired you or drew you about tech, or what do you think is unique about being in PR, specifically in the tech world, versus another industry?
That's a great question. And I think what got me hooked from that first agency job out in Silicon Valley, when I first had my exposure to or at least this particular agency, the type of tech companies we were working with, was, I guess, the possibility of it all and seeing that really develop from an early time. And then, I concurrently watching my career sort of develop in tandem, because at that time, the type of clients I were working with were more on the hardware side. There was no cloud. Google literally had just launched. I remember the day when a coworker said, "Oh, forget." I was still using Yahoo search, like, "Oh, you gotta try these guys. They just opened up like down the street from us." So, and then I might have been one of the first people Googling stuff in the country at that time.
Wow.
So those type of aha moments, and then being in that backyard where a lot of them were happening was pretty special and a pretty unique experience. Of course, also what equally unique was mere months later when the dot-com crash actually crashed, and I watched it crater the whole industry and like half the town in real time, and suddenly seeing less traffic and unemployment parties, and Starbucks suddenly has more baristas, and to the benefit of the local school systems, a lot of very qualified people suddenly got teaching jobs, which was very good for them. But it was still jarring to see that happen. But at the same time, it didn't spoil, my point of view about what tech could bring and how it could really, have positive aspects and really grow to the point where it's, where it is today, for better or for worse, everywhere. Whereas back then it was sort of, containerized, which is why my type of clients then were like the hardware clients, server stuff, things like that. But then as my career grew and I eventually came back to the East Coast and worked at various different agencies, the type of clients changed with the tech. Suddenly it was more, ad tech, a lot more ad tech and Marcom tech clients. And then it became, around the time when the web started changing, early tens, if you will, the launch of BuzzFeed that time. So I certainly was
That's
working
when
with,
things started getting more social, right? Like
yeah,
things,
social
yeah.
social media launched, that was already launched at that point. Twitter was, I just launched, and these new media companies were sort of taking that direction. So I was working with lots of different publishers and new media websites and things like that. And then by, not terribly long ago, by 2014, 15, my prior agency, that's when I started working with what the model is today and what is much closer to the type of clients I have now, which is those who are, typically software based, B2B, usually a SaaS option, not always, or eventually became also the option for, an API play or things of that nature. But that's when I really saw that starting to take shape, because at that point the cloud was really starting to become established.
Mm-hmm.
And as we learned during COVID, suddenly you could do more things all digitally than you could ever before. The barrier for entry to set up a company and just ship a software as service finally existed. Where prior, way back in the days in Silicon Valley when I was there, it was probably just a dream of some people, or maybe not even on the board at that point.
Right. Yeah. Now it's like everybody's doing everything remotely, hiring remotely,
Mm-hmm.
meeting, using softwares that are full service, can
Mm-hmm.
handle multiple business solutions under one roof, all from just your phone or computer. So yeah, it's definitely come a long way. So to that point, you've watched the PR industry grow, uh, from the late 90s to now, and you also watched technology and the internet greatly transform and change. And you were in both worlds as a PR person with mostly tech clients. So my question to you is, what are some interesting shifts you've seen? How has the tech changed PR, and if anything, or possibly how has PR also maybe helped change the tech, if that's even if there's even any impact there?
Well, I'd say one particular aspect is definitely how we go about doing our business in the sense that, back when I first started, there were, like I said, it was online was still in its infancy. So a lot of the research for looking up reporters, even if you found it, obviously the Times was one of the earliest major news sites to have a website, but even if you looked it up, you might not be able to find that much information on a reporter, or if you did, they probably weren't posting their email address, and they certainly weren't posting a X or Twitter account because Twitter didn't exist. So so there was much, you couldn't really find that stuff online as much. So one of the main ways I did research back in the day was the things called Bacon books. It was a company called Bacon, which is now one you probably know, Cision. They've become a big
Yeah,
yeah.
actually, the founder of Harrow, who sold to Cision,
Mhm.
Peter Shankman, has been on this podcast.
Yep. Yeah, no, I remember meeting him some years ago, and I remember when he launched Harrow, I was one of the, I was definitely an early adopter, and I believe I still get the Harrow emails to this day.
I did too, until recently. Help a reporter out, by the way, is what
Yeah,
it stands for anyone listening who might not know.
exactly. And that's actually a great example of the transition that came, because prior was the company was Bacon's, and it was these Bacon books, and there were literally these gigantic books, like maybe this thick, big green books, and there was ones for, like, broadcast media and print media and this, and you had to look it up, and it was all white with really black, small black font, as if it was like an old-fashioned white pages. And for those of you in the audience who don't know, you could Google it. I'm probably dating myself, but that's the closest equivalent. But instead of looking up like a plumber, I was looking up a reporter covering, might be covering hardware at, ZDNet or whatever. So fast forward not too long afterwards, and to where we are today. Once again, it's all the stuff's all online. That's all. There's so many options. It's now Decision databases. There's Muckrack, and then there's all these other tools now which didn't exist that allow you to not only research, but you could actually pitch the reporters straight from the platform, which in the when I first started, the only really option was email, and sometimes, particularly broadcast, it was faxing. At
Wow.
this, yeah, so the tech definitely changed PR, make streamlining it. What the sort of the negative side of it is that, and especially with COVID, what happened with this is the displacement of people and journalists. Some are back in the office now at least 4 days a week and so forth. It's a major publication, but a lot of the smaller publications, on the positive, they can all this, like you said, dispersed workplace. They can have a staff of 10 at a upstart tech coverage publication, but they might be 10 in 10 different places across the country, and they're not all centralized. You can't call a centralized phone, and it sometimes is hit or miss. You have to have a really good relationship if you're going to try to contact them on their cell phone, because that's what most are working off these days. Long story short, if I had to depend on emails entirely just for the successful pitches I've had over the years, I would have gotten half of them, because a lot of times I just picked up the phone, rather
Mm.
than sending another follow-up email, or in some cases just a quick phone call just to talk with them, like, hey, I know you're busy. Quick question, what are you working on, this, that, or so on and so forth. And it really went a long way. And that's really become, it was already something that was becoming tricky, particularly with the tech press, and now with the displaced and dispersed workforce, even more so. So it's almost entirely on relying on email and or some of these other platforms where you can pitch from them, and where that's where it is sort of a negative, because it makes it harder for people like me to establish those relationships with reporters, and vis-a-vis, once they makes it hard for them to get to know some of us, which makes it harder for them to do their job when they do need a source and do need resources that that they're trying to find for whatever article they're working on.
Awesome. So what you're telling me is that while email and technology has made it a lot easier in some ways to
Mhm.
find people and reach out to them, where the true success, where you've gotten the best results and earned the most success, is through building actual human relationships and doing something that's completely foreign to a lot of millennials and Gen Z called picking up the phone and
Mhm.
talking to someone. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Uh, to an extent, I mean, don't get me wrong. I've also had plenty of successful pitches, which turned into successful coverage for my clients that never involved the phone and just involved a bunch of emails. But I didn't complete. But it was a nice balance. And if you
Hmm.
are able to still do this to this day, with the various platforms, and if you could throw an occasional phone call here and there, possibly depending on the reporter, even mixed in with like was a Telegraph or a Slack, but or LinkedIn even, but I've only used that on a handful of times. It's usually not those are while they're great business tools, they're not always the best. They're not always the best for PR pitching. Telegram being the exception because that works best with investigative journalists who are working with very some sensitive subject matter and might be talking to people where it's could be a life or death situation. So the
Interesting.
anonymity there.
Telegram. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that, but it's encrypted,
Telegram, yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? More than I guess different than WhatsApp.
Yeah.
I, yeah, interesting. And yeah, I totally hear you. I think today in our world of automation, this the same is true in sales and marketing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people don't want to be interrupted, and I think now we have to be more respectful of people's time. There's so many platforms, ways you can message or allow people to do things on their own time. But I also think that where you really build the relationships is by either taking it offline or to a Zoom call, a video
Mm-hmm.
call, something where you can really get to know each other and build the relationships. I think that's still key. So one thing to zoom out, I want to come back to the whole technology and the human role in PR in a moment, but before we go back to that, just a PR fundamentals question. This is something I've done some ghostwriting for PR
Mm-hmm.
for different agencies. One question that I like to ask, and I love to hear your take on, is what's a more valuable media placement, like for a tech company, for example, or a tech startup? Is it being in a huge, big name publication like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, or is it being in a more where in those that's a huge name and may have a huge circulation, but maybe only a small fraction of the audience is actually interested
Mm-hmm.
in that particular niche? Or is it better to be in a smaller, more streamlined, maybe trade journal or industry publication with a much smaller readership, but a higher percentage might be interested in that particular thing?
Well, I think in some cases it could go it could depend. It could be case by case. Sometimes it could be both if you're lucky enough. But for example, with a lot of clients I work with, they're usually on the B2B side and they're usually just starting out. It might be the first time they're ever working with a PR agency when they work for me, work not for me, when they work with me, and when they're working with me. And if that's the case, it usually means when I begin pushing out their messages and trying to raise their brand awareness, that most people don't know who they are, don't have much brand awareness. So it really makes more sense for those companies, those startups first coming out, to really try to reach their direct end user, their direct customer client, or whomever it is that they're trying to reach through industry press, through B2B targeted trade press, tech press. I mean, if you are able to get something in a Times or a journal, it likely, unless you're a super hot startup that's being led by a super hot founder who has cachet and has his or her own brand recognition and name recognition, or it's getting a crazy amount of funding, which is kind of hard to come by these days in our current funding climate. You probably won't get that anyway. You probably won't get a full profile in the Times or this and that or the Journal. And if you're lucky, maybe you get quoted in a trend story, but it's usually something we have to build up to because they don't always focus on they don't always focus on a particular interesting startup that's doing something interesting in their industry as quickly as a more focused trade or tech publication. So I usually tend to go that route. But I mean, there's always some exceptions, and there's other ways to get in higher profile publications, even if it is more indirect, like per what I said about being quoted in a trend story. I had a client that was very much focused on the B2B side, a fintech client whose end users were banks and lenders. And we did get a majority of coverage, good coverage in those type of publications. But because he was also a very good credit expert and had a credit repair business, really knew that stuff in and out, I was able to get him quoted for his own thought leadership and his own expertise in places like, Fox Business and CNET, where they were doing an article about what you need to do XYZ for a credit score and so forth. So that was sort of a great example of balancing both, using more the bigger picture about the company story for the trades and the niche tech, where and at the same time balancing that with his founder story and his thought leadership expertise for the higher profile, maybe more mainstream press, if you will.
There's more cachet. Yeah. I mean, I'm not in PR directly, although I've done some PR work. I don't like not pitching reporters. I'm more on the content writing side of things. But being in marketing and an adjacent field of marketing and advertising content, one thing that I like to compare it to, the way I think about it is like it's branding versus sales. Like I think being in, even if not too many people read it, just being able to put on your press kit, like as seen or mentioned in USA Today, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, whatever, even if it was like the CEO or someone on the team was quoted, that's like a great branding, great optics, that lends some credibility to a potential investor or customer. And being in these trade journals is more, I think, directly tied to the sales pipeline. Maybe you can generate more inquiries and targeted leads. That's the way I kind of think of it. One question I have for you also, just and this kind of connects what I do in social media marketing, content marketing, digital advertising. What is the best way, in your opinion, to really get as much daylight as possible on your placements? Like, how can you? Congratulations, you got a placement in a really good publication. Like, how do you maximize that beyond just the old, put it in my email, one email newsletter blast, share it to my socials that nobody looks at, and maybe put it in my email, stick it in my email signature to hope that somebody reads it. What else can we do to really maximize opportunities from our media placements?
Sure. Well, yeah, you sort of covered the basics, like you said, the email blast, the social channel stuff, as seen in section of the website, which is actually it's actually good to remind some clients of that, because not everybody does that or thinks to do that automatically, even
For
if they check
sure,
them.
little
Yeah,
bases like that. You'd be surprised. So many people don't check those. It's like that's an easy one. Just yeah.
yeah, it's literally it's low hanging fruit and it's easy to pick, but you'd be surprised how many founders don't think about that and don't realize that that for the straight that's the first thing you do, but then there are things you could do after it, and some of it also depends on the type of press coverage you got as well, how much you can leverage that, if you will, what you're saying. And yeah, I guess a good example could be like if it's a large story about based on a data pitch or a data report, company did a survey and found XYZ in this industry and this and that after surveying 3,000 people about whatever, and the results actually were really interesting and newsworthy, because that's another discussion for another day. There's lots of data reports, lots of surveys, doesn't mean they're always newsworthy, and a lot of times they're self-serving. Anyway, let's say
Sure.
that's not the case. We got some good data points, and if there's a lot of them, and let's say there's levels of coverage on that, maybe there was one great article, but it only really focused on like the top takeaways from that survey and quoted the CEO or the founder or whomever. But then there was some other articles where it focused on some of the other interesting takeaways that might not have been might have been a couple spots down. You could really maximize that and focus on those in different, like webinar sessions. You could have a whole webinar where it's maybe talking to the survey, the survey company, the main person who helped run the questions and figure it out, or talk to someone in the industry like an expert, and you're being interviewed. Based on this, we found on this recent survey, we found this XYZ and have a discussion about it. So recently featured in, this, they focused on this, but we want to dive down, a little bit further. So that's a way where you could take it, stretch it to a different area. You could even stretch that content to other content that could be placed. We've done this before where, once again, part of it might have been featured more heavily than the other part, but that other part was still interesting. What if we were to wrap that up into a pitch it as a potential opinion article to the right op-ed editor at the right tech publication or industry pub, depending what the survey is. And then suddenly it's a chance where you can be a smidgen self-serving, but at the same time offering data and information in a way that's helpful to their readers and not completely an ad about your company. Like, we, in the sense that, we recently ran the survey and we found X, Y, and Z and X, Y, and Z. And then we dive into what this means and what the industry has to do to, answer the question that's being brought up from those results, or, the solution to the problem. So those are just some
Like
examples.
their take on it, basically.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
those are just some examples of other ways you could still push that content out. Granted, like I said, not every article has that type of example, but that's just a good one.
those are all some great examples and creative out of the box ways to maximize your media placements. A lot of people don't think about it, and I know that in the public relations industry, there's always that fine line. It's a lot of ethics where there's that blurred line sometimes between like journalism and also promoting your client, your
Sorry,
company.
We're obviously not live. I can't really talk now. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'll be with you in a sec. Sorry about that. Did I just
Don't
have my CNN moment with the little girl walking?
don't worry about
Still
yeah,
classic.
exactly.
That's still classic, by the way. But
Oh, I love it. Yeah, it's work from home life, and like that video showed, and I think just made it normal. Like it is the new normal, and yeah. So basically, yes, you always have to strike that balance.
Mhm.
And one question. So another question I have for you is about with you're in the tech space. You're obviously covering a lot of startups. You're putting stories out there into the news cycle, trying to attract investors for them, or new users. What are a few trends, being in media, being in tech? What are a few interesting trends that you're seeing that maybe tech startups, CEOs, founders should be aware of, maybe when it comes to fundraising, or when it comes to media relations, or where it comes to user behavior?
Hmm. Well, I think the no-brainer trend that I'm seeing, and a lot of people are seeing as well, but I still think it's interesting. But at the same time, in real life, it's not necessarily manifesting in the real world quite yet. Is sort of I guess, the hype versus reality of AI. I know the AI Pandora box is open, and that's fine and all. And some of the, obviously we've had a lot of very heated and emotional reactions to, like, this is Skynet in 5 years from now. Well, the robot's going to be crushing our skulls, and and I'm looking for Sarah Connor. No, I personally don't think that's going to happen. But
Are you working with a lot of AI companies right now?
not quite yet. I'm starting to get into that. Or what's happening is, and that's part of the trend too, that the AI company, not everyone's an AI company, but everyone's sort of getting on the FOMO bandwagon and making sure they have an AI
They're all
app.
saying we use AI and machine learning in some aspect of their
Right.
solution, right? Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And from a media standpoint, I wouldn't say they're slathering over it, but it's still getting attention, and it hasn't run its course like, maybe the heat over like crypto startups did a couple years ago. That
Mhm.
said, when I've gone to like events where they're talking about AI, and it inevitably comes up almost all at every event, especially recently during Tech Week. When it comes to real world applications and case studies yet, and businesses really diving in, they're exploring it and looking at it, but there's really not a lot to talk about yet, which is not a bad thing per se, but it's just like any other new big technology. There might be a lot of hype at first, and like I said, people who are saying this is what we've been working on, this is the next big thing, versus we're the Terminator's coming, we're scared. But really, the reality is somewhere probably more in between, and I think that's something to keep in mind when especially if you are an AI startup or if you have an AI element when you're pushing out your narratives and your stories to the media, that there's a way to be excited about it. And obviously you want to be excited about the company that you're promoting, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity to maybe cut down the hyperbole a little bit and show, and if you could show like real practical applications, that could really go a long way with both potential end users who might be reading it and the media itself. Because once again, after a while, I think some of them are already seeing that there's just a little bit too much hype, and ultimately they're going to want to see that's great and all, or it's like, oh, another AI, but what's it actually do? And do you even have any proof yet that of success? And if you're able to show that and you're able to prove that to the media, it's going to go a really long way.
It's really good to know. Yeah, so it looks like we're already getting fatigued and tired out over the last year or so with AI, all this AI clickbait that people
Hmm.
want to actually, you have to make it clear to the media and to readers and viewers exactly what your solution, what practical benefit your solution has to their lives or to their business, and that will uh, set it apart from all the hype and all the distraction about AI. So my last question is actually about that. It's a good segue. Is
Hmm.
you've watched technology drastically change your workflow from going to the library and going through those the white pages or those books you were talking about,
Hmm.
to listservs like Harrow and Cision, to using probably a lot of automation and automated ways of sending out emails or LinkedIn messages or whatever. Um, where do you see your field, the PR field, going over the next 5, 10 years, as much as you can forecast,
Hmm.
in terms of your, AI? How do you see it disrupting or maybe enhancing? It sounds like already you're not afraid of AI. You look at it as something you can work with. So yeah, how do you think it will change your workflow or maybe make make your job easier or better?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And it's one that a lot of, just like the other industries I was referring to, PR is no exception. There's been plenty of articles in the past year or so about, is AI, how's it already beneficial? What's it going to do? Is it already taking our jobs? Should we be afraid? And really, what I've seen so far and what I could see it doing is only enhancing things to make our jobs easier, really with the stuff that doesn't require, I wouldn't say that's needs more automation, but that used to take up a little bit more time. Like I found already, for example, a Happy Muck Rack user, and when I was building a database the other day, I was already had in mind, since I'm a pro, I know what I'm doing. I already had in mind the type of people looking for this particular subject. So as I was adding it, it did something that maybe it couldn't have done a couple of years ago, thanks to their new AI functionality, which was, hey, we saw, it was some sort of pop-up message that said, hey, we saw the way this list is going. Hey, we saw you had this person. You might want to check out these folks to add to the list too. They could be relevant. It was some sort of message like that. I'm like, intriguing. Okay. And I went to their suggestions and I saw some of them were, some of them were like, okay, close, not quite. And some of them were like, yes, that's, that A, I
Mhm.
didn't even think of that person, or B, that was like the next person I was going to add. And then I was able to easily then click the buttons and add it to the
So it
list
can
I was
help you.
working.
The machine learning and the AI can help you determine who to help you change who to you're not necessarily how you pitch, but who you pitch to. It can help you, sorry, help you figure out like who to pitch to and things like that.
Exactly. So that was a great example of like, oh, there you go. You might have, did it shave off? Did it still take some time? And did it shave off? Did like, make it half the amount of time I needed for the assignment? No. But did it shave off a couple minutes? And more importantly, did it maybe offer up suggestions of some people I might not even thought of? Yeah. Even if they weren't added to the list, it was still okay. Food for thought. Not for this list, but could be for another one. So that's where the benefits, I think, really add up. And particularly in PR, you've been seeing a lot of this stuff, not just for my example, but on the content development side, where you might be able to fill in some of the gaps or maybe get a press release started, or if you're working on an op-ed article that you're writing on behalf of the client and you're stuck on a particular factoid, you can maybe use one of the chat GPTs or Bing or one of those, and you know give
And
some
outline it.
yeah, get some
Yeah.
keywords or say like, XYZ, X term, Y term, Z term, and see when it comes back. And some of that, when I've tried it and occasionally use it, it's been beneficial. But the catch is, it's still, you can't rely on it to do your entire writing job, because one time it came back and I was just sort of testing it. Actually, I actually put in some keywords for a press release I had already written, was approved, and it was already actively being pitched. So this was truly a test. I put some key parts of that press release in, came back with a full thing, full like article. I'm like, okay, impressive. Let's see. First couple paragraphs. I'm like, wow, I might have written it pretty close to that. And then it lost me when the fourth paragraph says, well, the current Trump administration, and it was like the record scratch, like, no, 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 wait a minute, wait a minute. And it just went, then it got worse from there. I'm like, so I think as now, right now, AI is a tool, at least in my industry, consider it just like anything else, a tool that you could use that could either maybe cut down on the amount of minutes in your time needed for different assignments, but really more as an extra, so almost like an extra friend, or if you had like a junior employee, you could do that extra research, but not something we could lay our hat on as, okay, it'll take care of it all. Now, will it go that way in 5, 10 years? Possibly, but I still think that even if it gets to that point where let's say I did that same test and put in the press release of the article, came back perfect, that's great and all, but I don't know if it's completely going to automate the actual deployment of tactics, in the sense, is it going to automate me? Yeah, you could automate some of those pitches, and maybe it could get to the point where you can write the entire pitch. But then let's say there's a positive response. It's going to automate the response back to the reporter. Is it then going to then talk to the client and do some media training or do some brush up Q&A stuff to prep for the interview? Is it going to sit in the interview with the reporter and be there to mostly monitor, but to also to jump in as needed, or to remind your client that, hey, you might want to tell a reporter here about the XYZ thing.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to get to that level, and honestly, I don't know. I don't know if it can, nor do I think it should get to that level, because that's where the human touch really does make a difference, and that's the type of relationships we were talking about, and the give and take that the clients pay you for.
Exactly. Well said. And yeah, I mean, at least in this point in time, robots don't have bank accounts. So your business people are still doing business with people. And I think that's a great perspective. I think that AI, obviously, as you pointed out, it's not there yet. It's still could be wildly inaccurate and
Mm,
stilted. And even when it does get there, I think that professionals who especially bring so much experience to the table
mm,
using AI will probably outpace those who don't play with it and test it like you are. And your workflow might change. Like you said, a lot of things that you used to do, you now no longer have to do, or it could be done by an intern, or and now could be done by a bot. But the more maybe the best parts of your job, the job that you truly that truly needs your expertise, like that human
mm,
touch and the specifics of strategy and that come up in the relationships between the client and the media that can't just be predicted by an algorithm. That is probably
mm.
where you'll be spending more of your time, I think, going forward. And it's probably the part of the job that you really like and where your skills truly shine. So that's awesome. Scott, thank you so much. Where can people find you and learn more?
Sure. They could find me mostly at LinkedIn. My profile, my business level PR is also has a company profile there. The website itself, which is www.levelpr.co. And also, they could find out more information at courses.levelpr.com, because that is the home of my new online education course called PR Toolkit for Tech Startups, which is something I just launched about a month ago. And
Wow, congrats.
thank you, thank you. And it's designed for the startup founders, or for marketing folks at startups, not always for the founder, but it could also be for a marketing person who wants to learn more about PR and do it themselves and give it a try at least, because the course is designed not just, okay, this is PR, this is a press release, or this is what where the media went from here to there. It's a lot of DIY tactics and how to actually pitch and what you need to keep in mind and the types of pitches and case study examples, et cetera, et cetera. So if it really is designed for a founder or, like I said, a marketing person at a startup who might have the time to and the desire to want to learn more and possibly give it a try themselves, but who can't, but at a price point that's reasonable for them vis-a-vis, compared to if they were to, hire someone like myself or retainer services.
Like a consultant. Excellent. Well, at the Z Learning podcast, we love online education, and you've probably seen our other episodes. We talk a lot about L&D, learning and development, and upskilling, and having people, experts within subject matter experts within your organization, creating this kind of content. I will definitely link your course in the show notes so anyone listening can go and find it and check it out. Scott, thank you so much, and looking forward to speaking again soon.
No, thank you so much as well, Zev. It was an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this, and it was these are great questions, and it was great to chat about them.